Welcome to our program. My name is Doug Reeder. I'm the executive chairman and one of the founding partners here at Sterling Seacrest Pritchard. We are one of the largest privately held independent insurance agencies in the southeastern United States. We work in partnership with our clients and community to provide services, solutions, and support customized to today's dynamic marketplace. Our firm has a client-first philosophy and robust resource platform delivered by almost 300 colleagues across 8 offices, in the Southeast. One of our key differentiators is deep industry vertical structure with dedicated teams servicing healthcare, construction, real estate and hospitality, transportation, logistics, nonprofits, as well as individual personal insurance needs in our private client practice. We also have a large benefits consulting practice, which works across industries, so is agnostic from that standpoint. We are a broker-owned firm with a common long-term perspective and a commitment to educating and informing, which is manifested in today's program. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We have over 100 attendees signed up for today, which is a new record for us in our almost 8-year-old education program. Cyber exposures and loss costs are on a significant upward trend, and a day rarely passes without an announcement of a large hack or cyber loss. I'm sure you guys have all heard about the Colonial Pipeline hack that recently occurred and hit us close to home in our backyard in Alpharetta. As such, we're pleased to welcome Carl Grant and Edric Lowe with Travelers, who are going to show us how to recognize cyber threats, develop policies to prevent a potential breach, and help ensure that you have the correct coverage in place. Carl Grant is currently claims counsel at Travelers, assigned to the first-party claims team, handling claims under commercial crime policies, cyber policies, financial institution bonds, and kidnap and ransom policies. He joined Travelers in July of 2014. Prior to joining Travelers, Carl worked with AIG in the Fidelity Bond Department, handling fidelity claims involving commercial companies and financial institutions for almost 14 years. Carl is a graduate of the University of Rochester with a Bachelor of Arts degree in history and a graduate of the Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law School with a Juris Doctorate. Edric Lowe is a senior underwriter at Travelers with 12 years underwriting experience. He underwrites directors and officers liability, employment practices liability, fiduciary, crime, and cyber coverages. Edric joined Travelers in 2009 after graduating from Georgia State University with a bachelor's degree in finance. We're all looking forward with what they have to say. Travelers is a leading underwriter and one of the pioneers of this coverage, so I'm sure it's going to be very informative. Everyone, please welcome Carl and Edric, and just note that we've got a little bit of a audio-video problem, so Edric is joined via telephone, so most of the video will be directed by Carl. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. As Doug said, I'm a claims counsel in Travelers. I handle cyber claims, fidelity, and kidnap and ransom. I'm hoping today to educate you on cyber risk, trends, and responses. We'll go through everything. We'll also talk about social engineering claims as well. And you can ask questions afterwards, and then we'll go from there. Edric, do you want to say anything?
Yeah. Can they hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank Doug and everyone at Sterling for giving us this opportunity. Look forward to share with you guys some of the trends and exposures we're seeing in the marketplace, as well as some of the risks that everyday businesses face. Carl, go ahead.
Thank you, Edric, and we'll get started. Just a little disclaimer, my company asked that I put this on when I do these presentations. It's just a presentation. It doesn't mean that this is how coverage is going to go or anything like that. But this is our disclaimer, and we'll get started. And this is our agenda. We'll go through cyber risks, threats, the evolution of cybercrime, cyber claim trends, cyber claim process, the incident process, response trends, cost drivers, and we'll also do social engineering. Okay, you hear a lot about cyber in the news, and most recently you heard about what happened with CNA, Colonial Pipe. It happens almost every day. A lot of the threats, the attacks, and the vulnerabilities are caused by these type of things. It's not just a hacker breaking in to a computer or someone hitting an inadvertent email. Cyber can occur through a failure to patch. We've seen incidences where companies have failed to put up patches on their computers or their servers, and that's allowed bad guys to get in. It can also happen through employee negligence, leaving a computer on or leaving it away someplace, lost laptops, a skimmer, vendor breach. We see a lot of those too, where vendors get breached and then fake emails go out to our insureds, or they get access to the insured system through the vendor system, because sometimes vendors have access to other computer systems. Social engineering is a big thing too. You hear about social engineering where fake emails go out, people pretend to be vendors or employees or even CFOs and CEOs, and they dupe employees to send money, or not even just money. We've seen losses where they get access to HR records, work comp records, tax records, social security information as well. They're not always just after money; they're after information as well too. Next slide. Cyber claim trends, and this is 2019. It's probably expanded since then. The biggest drivers are social engineering, the fake emails that come out from bad actors sent to companies or individuals to get access to information or to divert checks or get wire transfers. We see the emails all the time. They pretend to be someone, they're friendly, but at the end they're asked, hey, can you switch banking information and send it to this? Or we got new banking information. We just recently changed it, and people believe it's true. They change the banking information, and before you know it, the bad guys have access to money, and they've stolen information or money. The biggest two other drivers or claim trends is malware, virus. That's where information gets on your computer system that can come through an email or get access through someone getting into the system. Malware or virus can shut down the system, steal information, deny you access, or destroy information too if they're malicious enough. And usually malware and virus goes hand in hand with ransomware, which is sometimes is the same thing. Ransomware, they get into the system, they shut it down completely. You get a little thing on your computer saying your system has been hacked and shut down. Please call this number if you want your system back, and they have a ransom demand. And if, as Doug said, demands have gone up. Colonial Pipe 4 million. I think CNA paid 40 million. It's all in Bitcoins, which you have to find and pay. So those are the biggest claim trends we're seeing so far.
Carl?
Yes, go ahead, Edric.
Just to add to your what you had just mentioned, I think a lot of folks, we see the news and we see the Colonial and the CNA and the old Home Depot and Target breaches. But when it comes to ransomware and social engineering, I mean, we're seeing twice as many losses on the small to mid-sized companies. It's just not making the news every day. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And I wanted to ask you, the ransomware, when it gets deployed, is that what's the most common way that ransomware gets deployed? Is that through like an email attachment, someone opening that up, or is there some other method of ransomware getting deployed?
The easiest way is an email. They send an email that looks obnoxious, or sometimes it even looks like a familiar email and has a link, and it says, hey, you won this contest, or hey, can you look at this and click this link? And once you click it, that's how they get into the system, and that's how they install the ransomware. That is the easiest and probably most prevalent form of doing it. There's such a thing as a brute force attack, which is rare because it's just like it says, a brute force attack. Think of your house. If someone wants to break into your house, they got to break a window or break a door. Those are brute force attacks, but it's rare and it's hard to do because most systems are very built to stop those timer attacks. And if someone does a brute force, there's alarm bells that go off that alert IT departments in most companies that someone's trying to break into the system. It's harder for the scammers to do it that way. The easiest way is the email way, because once they get in, there's no way of really detecting them until it's too late. Anything else you want to say, Edric?
No, that was it. Thanks for answering that.
Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. Cyber top causes of loss. Like I said, ransomware, where your information is held hostage. Can you recover it? Can you get it to the back? The optimal thing for a lot of companies is to have backups. Backup every day, as the IT people say, or the forensic computer people tell us, backup as often as possible. But one of the problems with backup is it should be kept in a place far away from your system, in a separate system or in a warehouse. What we find out and see that a lot of people do have backups. If they're good, you can restore the system. You don't have to pay the ransom and you're good. But if the backups are in the same place as the original system, then you have no access to it. And that's what the bad guys look for as well. They look to see where the backups are. Is it in the system they got into? If it's separate in a separate system, in a warehouse or locked away with a key, they can't get access to it. And for a lot of our computer forensic people we use, a good backup stored away from the original system is great for them, because then they can use that to restore the system and we don't have to pay the bad guys the Bitcoins. Social engineering. Yes, go ahead, David.
The one thing that I just wanted to add about the ransomware deployment and the backups is a lot of times when ransomware is deployed, if they get to if it gets to affect a privileged or admin account, though once it has that access, it can actually go into the backups if it's something on site that's not segmented properly, and essentially corrupt the backup as well. So just to reiterate Carl's point, it's very, very beneficial to have your backups either done by a third-party cloud or somewhere off-site, not connected to the network, or segmented rather well. Otherwise, if an admin or privileged account does get breached, they can deploy the ransomware through that account as well, which just triples the devastation that it causes.
Correct. Thank you, Edric. Definitely, admin accounts are always what they're looking for, so they can get access to everything and lock down everything, and that makes it much harder to get the system back up and running. Social engineering, as we talked about, being tricked into paying money to a fraudster. That's getting an email from somebody you know or a vendor you do business with. We typically see the email comes from a vendor and it says, hey, you know, can you pay this bill? You haven't paid this bill previously, or this is a new bill. And the employee thinks they're dealing with the person that they're normally deal with. And they wind up paying the bill to a new bank account or to the fraudster. Easiest way to prevent all this stuff is if you get an email you don't understand or you don't see, call up the vendor, call up the employee, call up anybody to say, hey, did you send me that email? That's the easiest way to prevent social engineering. And I think Edric, we're requiring multi-factor authentication for a lot of systems in regards to emails and computer system, correct?
Yes, Carl. That is one extremely effective way to prevent really any sort of cyber breach, whether it be a ransomware deployment or a social engineering scam, is if they have multi-factor authentication to make sure that the person accessing the email is actually the correct person. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider. What's your typical claim payouts on a social engineering claim, Carl? If you had to put an average on those costs?
Right now, it's over 100,000. That's typical right now.
Wow.
Yes, and it's going up. I've seen some as much as 500,000, 200,000, 300,000 on social engineering claims. Next is third-party vendors. We all have third-party vendors. Travelers has third-party vendors. Any company, anyone doing business has third-party vendors. A lot of time, these cyber attacks get into the third-party system. If the cloud that they're using, and there are different clouds to use, different IT companies have different amounts of security. If that's hacked, then they get access to customer information, credit card information. That can impact your customers. And that's a whole thing about with social engineering, is that they get access to information, and people's lives could be disrupted. Social security numbers could be used to set up fake bank accounts or get mortgages. Credit card information can be used to purchase stuff, or change credit card, or change the who gets access to the system. And for a lot of companies, states are cracking down, governments are cracking down. If your system's breached and they get access to sensitive personal information, PI, or payment card information, PCI, or health information, company's responsible for that. And there's a lot of fees you have to pay. There's punishment for that. There's monitoring you have to do, sometimes even lawsuits. So that's another top driving cost of cyber losses. That's something that companies have to take into account. They're not just them being affected, but their customers, their employees, their sensitive data that they're holding on to. The last thing is employees clicking on phishing emails, which is the number one, not to say number one, it's one of the biggest causes of cyber. An employee gets an email they don't recognize, or they think they recognize it, and then they click on the link, or they think it's something familiar, or they just not paying attention and clicking links. That gets access to that gets access to email system, the computer system. What also this doesn't tell you is about rogue employees or disgruntled employees. So we've not seen too many of those. I've had one some time ago where a rogue employee got into the system and started locking down stuff because he'd been fired for something. One of the things you should also remember is cutting off access or limiting access to employees present and former employees, so they don't have access to your system, or changing in their login so they don't destroy your system or hold you ransom or take marketing information. So those are things you have to look out for as well.
Hey, Carl,
yes.
question come through. Are you okay with answering it really quickly?
Yes, I can.
Okay. The question is, can you emphasize on lateral entry and how to identify exfiltration?
Oh, wow, that's a cyber question for IT person. Our and maybe you can answer this, Edric, if you can. The computer people we hire who work on our claims for us, one of the things, and I'm going to go through a breach response, is that they figure out how the entry occurred. They also figure out what was taken. They also figure out what information was locked down, what information has been accessed. One of the things they do is ask you what you have on your system. They look at the various systems. So the IT people, once they put together a plan, they'll give you a detailed report as how the person got in, when they got in, what did they take, and how they access the system. So you get all that as part of your service, at least with us, in regards to the breach and how they got in and the entry. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Carl. Yeah, that's a very, very technical question. As far as lateral movement and exfiltration, a lot of that is going to depend on what sort of security resources you have installed or use on the system. I think that really comes down to your network infrastructure and what kind of security suites you use. I think CrowdStrike and some of those big players, I know they specialize in segmenting networks and preventing or making lateral movement a lot harder, as well as exfiltration. But ultimately, I think it generally comes down to what kind of threat response you have in place, what kind of software you have in place. I can't think of anything that employees can do to make that less of an exposure.
Thank you, Edric. As you can see on the PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to take you through a cyber breach response continuum, how it occurs, at least for us, what we do. When we first get this, a security or privacy breach, we get notified of this through email or phone call. All travelers insured have on their policy an email or a phone number they can call when they get a breach. If a breach occurs, we should be notified as soon as possible. The quicker we can respond, the better it is for us and better for our vendors to deal with the whole situation. The longer it takes, the harder it is to deal with the situation. So once you have a security or breach of privacy, you notify travelers, and a couple of things occur. First, we need to confirm that your traveler is insured and you have the requisite coverage. Next, we do a factual overview so we understand exactly what happened, whether it was an email or social engineering, is it ransomware, Did they just get into the system? However it happened, we just need to know the facts, the basic facts, as much as possible, so we can figure out what needs to be done. And the last thing we do is hire a breach coach. And a breach coach, for those who don't know, is a privacy attorney. It's a lawyer who is schooled in these type of matters. They have done many breach calls. We work with several law firms that handle breach calls. And the breach coach will have another call with us on the line, and they will ask you even more detailed questions and go over the factual overview. Their job is to protect the insured. Protect the insured in regards to privacy issues, protect the insured in regards to any breach that has occurred, whether the government finds out and they start knocking on the door. Many things could happen with a breach, especially for certain companies. If you're a healthcare company, or you do government contracts, or you just have personal information, either health information of your employees or payment card information, personal information. Certain laws in certain states get set off, and the breach coach job is to navigate all that. He's like the coach. He handles the whole thing and he manages it. He decides what forensic people we should use. He also will decide whether or not we need a public relations person. Our policy provides that, because if the press starts knocking on your door, or the government, or even just your clients or vendors, he will manage all of that. And on the breach call, it'll be the breach coach. It may be a forensics. It may be other people. They'll put together an action plan. This is all done within 24, 48 hours, because we have to move very fast, because time is money. The longer you're down, the harder it is to respond to customers, the harder it is to get back to business. So the breach coach will put together an action plan, and he'll direct who does what. Part of it will be the forensics. We'll decide, should we pay the ransom? Should we not pay the ransom? Can the computer forensic people get the system restored using backups or other means? That will be the action plan, and we'll present it to the insured, and we'll go from there. Now, if we decide to do a ransom or pay a ransom, you don't negotiate, we don't negotiate. So there's some kind of separation between us and the bad guys. The breach coach or the forensic person does the negotiation. They talk to the bad guys. They try and figure out who they are, if they've dealt with them before, which helps a lot, because then you know how the negotiations are going to go, or what kind of who you're negotiating with. And they will try and get the ransom down or negotiate a reasonable and manageable fee. The insured does not have to worry about getting Bitcoins or whatever cyber currency is popular right now. The breach coach and the forensic people can get access to that, and they can pay for that, and that will be worked in the invoice or bill that's covered by the policy. Once they pay the bad guys, they usually get the key, which is a computer key, and they can unlock the system. It's rare that the system is not unlocked with the key. If they go the route of working on the backups or trying to break out of the ransomware, they'll go that route, and that'll take a couple of days or even shorter time for them to restore the system. So you got two options. It says engage the breach coach. The insured is not obligated to hire the breach coach. It's one of the services we offer. We recommend it. Some of our insured decide to go their own way and work out things on their own, which is understandable. But most of our insureds work with a breach coach and engage him. He's an attorney. He works for you. He does not work for us. All we do is reimburse his fees, less the retention. And they execute the plan. Whether it's business interruption, social engineering, funds transfer fraud, or ransomware, or just employee negligence, or a rogue employee, they'll execute the plan. And response time, they try and do this as quickly as possible. A week is usually a long time, unless it's really bad and the negotiations are not going well, but they try and get this done within a week, maybe even less time, to get you back in operation and get everything done. We also have a post call with the insured. After everything's settled, the dust is settled, they've dealt with everything, we have a post call with the insured, and we discuss what happened, what went right, what went wrong. If there are forensic people on the line, they'll also tell the insured where their weaknesses are and where they should fix things. And Edric, we still have the betterment coverage that we offer as well. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. we do offer betterment coverage, which is essentially upgrading any of the affected systems, whether it be hardware or software. There's a limit and assigned dollar value that's available to policyholders that they can access. So once the breach has occurred, afterwards, if the forensics or any sort of third-party security vendor that was used in the incident recommends upgrading of certain pieces of hardware or software, then the client's insureds have access to a limit that covers that as well. And that's a fairly new coverage in the cyber world, and it's something that we use quite often. That gets used quite often if insured has suffered a breach.
Yes.
Carl, just also I'm not sure if you mentioned it, I may have missed it, but the Travelers Claim hotline it's a 24-hour hotline, right? And they pretty much answer that every single time, right?
Correct. Yes, I did not mention that. Thank you. It's a 24-hour hotline. Even the email that you send is monitored 24 hours. There's someone available 24 hours, 7 days a week, even on the weekends. So if you have a loss, don't hesitate to contact us. We can respond immediately, and someone will take your call or email. Okay, we're going to the next slide. It just goes through everything as I discussed, the different areas. And this just goes through the coverage, our cyber risk breach response and coverages. Action plan, it just says which insurance agreement, computer. If you have a breach coach on forensics, it's covered on the computer and legal experts. Restoration is data restoration. Notification is privacy breach notification. Negotiating and funding the ransom, that falls on the cyber extortion. Public relations falls on the public relations. And as Edric Moss mentioned, the system improvements, that falls under the betterment coverage. And those are the various actions, and those is what we covered based on our policy. Going to the next slide. And this is just a claim process. Who does what? My role as a claim handler, that's what I handle, the logistics, putting together the team, coordinating the stakeholders, which is the insured, the agent, and the IT person or anyone else who wants to be involved, guiding the response, explaining available coverage, and review and process expenses. Breach coach, his job is to explain the respective roles of everybody, whether it's the forensic people, the public relations, or anyone else who he decides to hire, which is all covered by the policy in order to deal with this. He gathers information about the incident. As I stated, he puts together the initial recommendation. He communicates the plan, discusses next steps, and determines and facilitates notification. And notification is all 50 states, including Europe, and most countries have notification laws. If a breach has occurred, every company or insured or anyone who does business with the public has to notify the state, federal government, and if you're dealing with HIPAA, you have to notify the Department of Health and other organizations that there's been a breach. You have to say who, what, where, and how. And I think the breach coach, he organized all that. He does all that. He sends out the notification. And they're going to want to know what you're going to do to fix the problem, whose records have been accessed, and how will you bring remedy to the people who have been affected, either your customers or vendors or whoever. That's what the state wants to know. The federal government wants to know. Most countries want to know as well. And there are stiff fines and penalties if these steps are not taken and responded to.
Carl?
Yes, go ahead, Derek.
Just to elaborate and add some color on the notification, the notification, as you mentioned, is required for any individual or entity that was affected, whose information was affected by the breach. And all the different states have different requirements when it comes to notification. And that's why it's beneficial to use, when an incident occurs, to use Travelers recommended breach coaches, because these guys deal with thousands of these incidents every year. So handling it by yourself and then figuring out, what the state of Florida requires with regards to notification, and what Georgia requires, and maybe what Maine requires, and then maybe what Bulgaria and Europe requires if someone was affected there. It all needs to be knowledge that the breach coach has, and that can sometimes get very complex because Georgia may have a requirement where you need to notify individuals by text message and email within 30 days. Florida may have a different requirement that just says you need to notify individuals by email within a 45-day period. So it all gets, it's a lot of information for the different states and countries out there. So that's why it is beneficial to use a recognized breach coach or privacy attorney that has experience dealing with the different states and knowing all the laws and requirements for each of these different states or countries.
Correct. Thank you, Edric. I appreciate that. Definitely. And I've had losses where people did not even know where their customers were. I had a loss with a jewelry store in Maine, no, not Maine, in Michigan or Minnesota. They thought they were local. They were not local. They have an internet website. They were not local. They had people from Europe getting on their website. So they had to respond to the GDPR notification laws, which they would have never known if they had done this on their own. Breach Coach was able to figure that out and prevent what could have been some hefty fines and punishment in regards to that. Next slide. And this is just more ransomware trends. Ransomware attacks is 2019, 2020, and as you know, when looking at the news, 2021, they're becoming dominant and bigger. Common vectors are malicious email, phishing, brute force, which happens on occasion, website insecurities. If your website is not secure, if you ever go on a website and you look at the top, you see a little lock on there. That will tell you if the website is secure. If it's not secure, the lock will open and that'll tell you that the website is not secure and that everyone can see what you're doing on the World Wide Web. What's also been happening, seeing how since the COVID and with the pandemic, remote workers have been working from home. Unfortunately, a lot of people work from home don't have great internet or firewalls or security, and we're finding that that's a vulnerability that most insurers don't realize, a remote desktop protocol. You have to make sure that is secure and that the people who are logging in have security. Here at Travelers, we have dual authentication. We not only just log into the system, but we have to give a special code to get access to the system. Logging in is not enough, and that's what we find is the easiest way to prevent attackers from getting into the system. Stolen credentials as well. You have an employee who loses their wallet or their laptop or their purse, or they're out at Starbucks and somebody sees them logging in on their computer and writes down their login information, which occurs and happens. You have to be cognizant of that. Ransomware is on the rise. Roku and Maze are the most expensive forms of ransomware. Their whole companies organized, and bad guys have organized whole companies to facilitate ransomware. I think Dark Web was the one who did Colonial. They're actually a company. They organize. They have HR, which is strange, and they run it as a business. There's one called Evil Corp in Russia that does the same thing. So all this is the rise of ransomware is becoming a business, sort of like the mafia in some ways. And the average cost of ransomware and downtime is $141,000. That could be a day, and we're talking about business interruption, couple of days, depending on your business. It could be a couple of weeks. The bigger the business, the more you're down. I think when CNA got hit, they couldn't bind orders, they couldn't accept policies, they couldn't even get on their email. I'm sure they have a big business interruption loss. And that's one of the things, once you get attacked and you're down, you can't generate money, you can't do business. Next slide. And these are more of the cost drivers. Cost of the breach coach. Breach coaches are not cheap. But here at Travelers, we have certain breach coaches which we've made a arrangement with to bring down the cost. If you're a Travelers employee, if you're a Travelers insured, you use our breach coach, you get a reduced rate, which is much more than their original rate. Not to mention it's covered by the policy. So that's a peace of mind. If you go out on your own, breach coaches cost a lot more money. Time needed to identify and contain the breach. That takes a lot of time. If you do it through Travelers, you don't have to worry about that. We take care of that. Increased ransom demand from hackers. They're going up and up, as I said. Business interruption, which we talked about. Post-breach costs, notifying the impacted parties, as Edric and I talked about. Each state, each country has their own rules, and you have to comply with all those rules, and that costs time and money. Restoration cost, restoring your system. Just because you get the key back from the hackers doesn't mean your system's doesn't need some kind of restoration or fixing to make sure they didn't destroy any records or blundered into anything or knocked out any computers. And then there's third-party claims. Customers sue, unfortunately. We've seen lawsuits where customers decide to sue. The remedy you give them, they don't feel is enough. Usually the remedy is credit monitoring. If anything happens, we'll pay if someone uses your credit card or your social security number. But some people contact attorneys or plaintiff's attorneys, and then they sue. And then you have the cost of hiring an attorney, defending yourself in a lawsuit. Our policy handles that as well, too. If you get sued by third parties, either vendors or customers, we'll take care of that as well.
Hey, Carl?
Yes, go ahead, Edric.
Just kind of in the same vein as the vendor lawsuits, when an insured is affected by a breach and they outsource that data to, let's say, a cloud provider or some third-party vendor that holds that information, and that vendor gets breached, we're seeing lawsuits that's naming the insured, because whoever's affected, the party that's affected by the data breach or by the, sorry, not the data breach, by the information getting out, they don't care what the insured did with that information. They don't care that you gave it to XYZ Cloud or you outsourced it to some other company data center that's sitting somewhere. They know they gave the information to the insured, and when they do feel like they haven't been remedied enough, they'll file a lawsuit, and a lot of times they won't even name the vendor or the cloud provider that holds that information. So at the end of the day, the insured, our clients, didn't do anything wrong because they outsourced it to what they deemed was the most feasible, affordable, prudent cloud provider to hold the information. And these cloud providers, insurers need to read their hold harmless agreements and see exactly what they provide if there's a breach on their end, because they may not be financially able to pay if it's a massive breach that affects all of their customers and all of their data. I mean, the company they'll just go bankrupt. And also, another possibility is they may just not indemnify if there is a breach to their customers. So that's something to consider when outsourcing information, because a lot of times clients and insurers would have the mindset that, oh yeah, we have XYZ that takes care of that, we don't have to worry about it. Well, long story short, if they end up suffering a breach and data is compromised, whoever those data owners, if there's a lawsuit on the back end, they're definitely going to name the insured, and that's where that defense and liability coverage that we offer also comes into play.
Correct, Edric. And some states, and I think Europe, makes you responsible for the data no matter who you give it to, no matter where it is. Even if you hire a third-party vendor or you have a system stored in another country, you're responsible for the data. You collected it. So that's something to consider as well in regards to the lawsuits and the cost factors in dealing with everything. Next slide. As I talked about, cost drivers, which laws are at play? You got the federal laws. Not only federal, Congress has put together laws. If you work with health insurance, there's HIPAA laws. Banking, the comptroller, the FDIC has laws that banks have to comply with when it comes to data. Each state, all 50 states, I think most of them now have data privacy laws and breach laws. There are a few states like Alabama, and I forget which other state that did not, but I think they all have data privacy laws now. And then there's other laws. Local cities might have their own law. Local communities might have their own laws or regulations. Europe, Asia, all of the countries you have to deal with have their own separate laws. And that's where a breach coach comes in handy, as Edric said. He knows everything. He's been dealing with this. His job is to deal with all this. He keeps up on all the federal, state, and other laws. California just changed their law, made theirs very strict right now in regards to data breaches and keeping information. So that's something you might not know if you're a grocer or you're into insurance or you're just doing your normal manufacturing. That's why you hire a breach coach, and that's why we pay for it. So at least they can steer you through all these complicated laws and help you navigate it and get things right, and don't run afoul of any regulators, congressmen, or any other people that might be affected, including litigation based on these laws, helping defend litigation. Going to the next slide. And this is just some of the laws we talked about. Child Online Privacy Protection Act, federal laws. California's Consumer Privacy Act has been updated as of 2021. They have a new law. HIPAA, Ohio, just a state. Sarbanes-Oxley also. I think now on Sarbanes-Oxley, CFOs and CEO have to sign off saying that they have data security, that they're protecting laws, they have good, not protecting laws, protecting customer information, personal information of their employees, and that their computer software is up to speed. The payment card industry has their own standard. Visa, MasterCard, through the payment card industry data security standard, they're now requiring that anyone who uses their cards or accept any of their customer cards have to have up-to-date security, firewalls, have to have good protection, and keep data safe. So you got to deal with them too, and they have fines and punishment, and they can cease to do business with you if they feel you're not keeping up to their standards. But they have different levels of standards depending on the company you have. So if you have a smaller company, there's a lower level of standards. They don't expect the same standard mom and pop store has as to Amazon. So they kind of work with you in that regards, but they still expect you to have standards. Next slide. Now we'll talk about social engineering. And social engineering, it's an animal unto itself. It can be connected to a cyber attack, but it doesn't need to be. Social engineering basically is someone pretending to be you or your customer or your vendor. We call it social engineering because they learn things about you. They can get it through access through Facebook or Twitter or your LinkedIn account. They pretend to be you, even down to how you type and talk, all this to get access to a company. They follow CEOs, they follow CFOs, people in your company, they'll even follow secretaries, so they can mimic how they talk, who they work for, to get access. Social engineering is not new. It's occurred before. It's just more prevalent, and you've probably never heard of this gentleman. He worked in Germany during World War I. He was a clerk at a manufacturing plant. He figured out a way to socially engineer the German state and a German bank. I tell you this story because this is a social engineering story. The picture on the right is how he originally looked. The picture on the left is how he looks now. Not now, how he looked when he committed his social engineering act. He pretended to be a German officer. Somehow he figured out Germany during World War I, of course, the military was very prevalent. Officers got special privileges. People listened to officers. When a German officer walked down the street and said something, no hesitation. So he went to a costume shop and bought himself a German uniform. He put some medals on, he got a sword, and he marched down the street, and he noticed that people responded to him whenever he told people to do things. So this gentleman walked to a military base, walked in, ordered a sergeant and a bunch of soldiers to follow him. They did it right away. He's an officer. Why would they question him? He took these people down to City Hall and to a bank. He ordered all the people to leave the premise, and that he was taking over under orders of the Kaiser at the time. He got so good that he stole money or got access to money, tax records or banking information. He didn't steal a lot of money, about 10,000 probably, but it was enough at that time to make him very wealthy. And he dismissed the soldiers and he walked out and disappeared with the money. The story became a sensation, and he became a folk hero because at that time, Germany was a very structured society, and to move from the bottom to the top was very hard. But this guy committed social engineering. Eventually, he was arrested, but he was pardoned by the Kaiser. And there's actually a statue in the town of Kopernik where he's a folk hero. He did what no one else did. What no one else did, he was bold enough to do. He committed probably one of the first or most original social engineering claims. He pretended to be someone that he was not, and he got people to do what he wanted and got money because of the way he acted, his authoritative manner. the way he presented himself. As you can see in the two photos, the first one on the right, he doesn't look like you would listen to him at all. But if this person in the military uniform showed up, you would listen to him. And that's an illustration of social engineering. Easy, simple as that, by using this story. Going to the next slide. And here's some social engineering trends. The easiest one is the business executive scam. A CEO's email is hacked, and the hackers impersonate him, down to his words, how he speaks, how he sends emails. Very authoritative. He sends an email to a finance department authorizing a wire transfer. You get an email from a CEO. I don't know about you. You probably respond to it. He's telling you something to do. He's dictating you to do something. Normally, or I should say normally, in this situation, we would tell insureds to confirm that it was sent by the CEO. You pick up the phone, call the CEO or call the next line manager and say, hey, I got an email from the CEO. Should I be sending this money? And then hopefully people will verify whether it's fake or not. This would prevent the social engineering scam, but not always. And the person in the finance department wires the money to the fraudster because in the email it says send it to this bank account, which is not a bank account they normally use. That's one method of social engineering, the business executive scam. Another method that we see is very, very common. I'm seeing a lot of this is the supplier swindle scam. Usually this happens with foreign suppliers. A lot we're seeing this because it's easy to get into their email, and most people, even though they've been dealing with their foreign suppliers, don't know them very well, either due to language barrier or they've just never met them or they're in a totally different country. And it does sometimes their emails of the suppliers are hacked, sometimes they're not. But you get an email from this supplier or vendor. It usually says, hey, you know, we have these invoices that need to be paid, or you did not pay these invoices. We've changed our bank account information. We've got a new bank, or this is our new sign in or login to pay these invoices. Please send a wire transfer. And the email goes to the finance or the accounts payment department. They get it. They think it's authentic. They change the bank information, or they send payment to another bank account, which is not the one for the vendor, and the bad guy gets the funds. We've also seen where they sent emails where the insured has already paid the invoices, and they say, oh, we didn't get the money. Oh, we sent it out to you. We didn't get it. Can you resend it again? And the finance department or accounts payable department sent it out again. Easiest way to prevent this scam, pick up a phone, call the person. Yeah, with foreign suppliers, it's a little harder, but I recommend that you have some kind of contact or someone you could talk to over the foreign supplier if you get something strange or email, or someone at the CFO's office or accounts payable department. There must be some kind of authentication to be able to show that you're dealing with the right person and prevent these scams.
Hey, Carl?
Yes.
Just to add, when doing callback verification, which is what Carl is talking about, just making sure it's the correct person. The bad actors and the fraudsters have become very savvy in that they'll include their own telephone number in the email that's requesting it. And so when you call, when an insured or client calls back, they need to make sure that they have an established list of contact information for their different vendors or suppliers, and then go by that list and not just dial the number that's listed on the email signature, because like I said, they've become very savvy in changing that as well.
Yes, a lot of our bank customers, we require them to have another number or email address in which they can contact their customer. If they get a phone call or email that they think is suspicious, we tell them not to call that number or email, but call another email or phone number alternative on file so they can verify if this person's withdrawing money, if this is a correct person sending the email, requesting a transfer, or any kind of bank transaction in order to verify. You're correct, Edric. You should have another number to call or contact the person, whether it's a supplier, CFO, or whoever you're dealing with, to verify that the email is authentic.
Yeah, that's correct. We recommend having a verified, established list of vendors and contact information, as well as email addresses, because a lot of times when you want to make sure it's that person, and folks, the way we do business these days is everything is moving 1,000 miles a minute. So you hit reply, and the fraudster's email is an alternate email. It's not the same email as the person requesting it. So having those established lists of vendors, contact information, and email, that's the most prudent way to prevent social engineering. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to the person that's responsible or that's being targeted to be kind of, I don't want to say savvy, but to pay attention, because like I said, in this fast-paced world, folks just want to get stuff done. So it's better to be prudent and pay attention to the details, like the email, like the name. If there's like you said, I mean, they try and do their best job of imitating whoever it is by following them on social media, looking at the LinkedIn profiles of companies and seeing who are the people that matter, and then following those people. But usually when these social engineering scams happen, there's something that just doesn't seem right, and that's kind of where you have to rely on employees, either through email phishing campaigns, and also, of course, having that pre-approved contact information for vendors and clients.
Yes.
Helps.
Yeah, definitely, Edric. And our insureds, I forgot to mention, our insureds over at Travelers, they get access to the ERisk Hub, our website. It's an educational tool. It has informative stuff about ransomware, social engineering, malware. It even has courses in which you can use for your employees to teach them to identify these sort of emails, questionable emails. They also have breach coaches on there, and you can actually talk to one of our, send an email or talk to one of our cyber vendors or forensic people if you have questions about security, and you can get it's free for about the first call. And they also, correct me if I'm wrong, Edric, they still do the assessment for you, one-time free assessment?
Yeah, that's still the case, Carl. One of our preferred vendors is Symantec, that I think everyone knows about and what they do. And like Carl said, you get a free session with them and essentially ask them anything about your network. They do a vulnerability scan and see if there's anything glaring that they can identify to help improve network security.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits if you sign on with Travelers Policy. You get all that paid for by the company. That is it. Any questions?
We had one question come through. I think you might have answered part of it. If someone purchases coverage through Travelers, do you all have an interview you do with the insured to help them establish preventative measures?
And Edric, you can answer this as well too. Once they sign on as a Travelers insured, you get access to ERisk Hub website, and yes, you can have an interview with a forensic specialist to discuss your system and what kind of vulnerabilities you may have and what you may need to fix it or prevent this sort of thing. And you could always reach out to any of our breach coaches as well. Their numbers are online, their email is online. They're more than happy to answer any privacy questions, data breach questions, or anything about any of the laws in any of the 50 states, Europe or Asia as well too.
And frankly, as agents for this product and having worked with Travelers on a couple of nasty claims, we've been very impressed at the how quickly the breach coaches and the team is marshaled when an event occurs. We had one last year on the Labor Day holiday, and I think within 2 hours of the insured making contact with us, Travelers was on the phone with their management team, coaching them through the process and ultimately helping them reestablish service without having to pay, what was in that case a very large ransom demand, and frankly, well in excess of the policy limit in that case. But the breach coaching and the resources and all that Travelers brings to the table is a substantial amount of value in this case from our perspective.
Yeah, Doug, it helps a lot when knowing you're not alone in this at all. Once you make that phone call, you have a whole team at your disposal, and they will work with you. They'll work with your IT person, whoever you want work with. We don't replace your IT. We don't replace anybody. It's a partnership. We work with them, and like you said, we move as quickly as possible to marshal resources, whatever that may be or wherever they are, to get the system back online. And like you said, it may be we don't have to pay the ransomware. It may be we've seen this variant before, or we've worked with it before, and we know how to get it out or shut it down and get your system back up and running without paying any ransomware.
And we as a company engaged a training firm to constantly ping us with, bogus ransomware emails, and when people click on them when they shouldn't, they're immediately forced to take some remedial training, and then that we follow a regimented training schedule, even if you get straight A's on the trick emails. But I think that is absolutely kind of a crucial piece of this overall risk management strategy, is to engage somebody to help you with that ongoing constant reinforcement, because the weakest link is the distracted employee who clicks on something and then blows everything up.
Oh, yes. They do the same here at Travelers. We get fake emails and stuff like that as well, too. We actually have a dedicated...
Carl?
Go ahead, Edric, sorry.
I just wanted to add, but on what you and Doug said, that when an insured purchases a policy from Travelers, to be honest, any carrier that's offering cyber, most carriers would have some sort of resource. At Travelers, ours is ERisk Hub. They do have access to phishing exercises. Now, I think the first couple might be free, but then they get a discount based on the fact that they're a Travelers policy holder. But all of that is in the ERisk Hub. It's available for insureds to review. There's a lot of learning where it basically tells you how to set up a phishing exercises for your company. They've got tabletop exercises that insureds can download and look at and see the process of what exactly you have to do when a ransomware event occurs. So there's a lot of resources and benefits that come with purchasing a cyber policy.
Exactly.
Okay, we've had a few more questions come through.
Okay.
What are some of the risks selling or investing in Bitcoin?
I can't opine on that. I mean, Bitcoin, that's an investment thing. It's up to you. I mean, Bitcoin's supposed to be safe from what I understand. You have a unique key as to your access to it. Whether it's been hacked or not, I don't know. I've heard some exchanges have been hacked. It's up to you whether a company wants to do that on their own. You don't have to if you're running a company, if you're afraid of ransomware. Our vendors, our breach coaches have access to Bitcoin. If you have a ransomware event, you don't have to pay out for any Bitcoin. They'll have access. We don't pay out. They do it as well, too. So I can't opine on that as whether you want to invest in that or not, but it's not necessary if you're a Travelers insured, not at all.
Great question, though.
Yes.
Okay, our next question is, how common is it to come across ransomware?
Unfortunately, as Edric said, it's much more common than you realize. You only hear about the big stuff in the news, but the small companies and the medium-sized companies are getting hit as well. You just don't hear it. Probably a day does not go by where a company does not get hit by ransomware. It's just...
Yeah.
Go ahead, Edric.
Also, thanks, Carl. Also, to add to that, I think we obviously see about the big companies getting hit, and that doesn't mean the small to mid-sized companies are not getting hit. It's the way that ransomware is designed is it doesn't discriminate. Where it can get access is where it gets in, and the ransomware, it sits on public networks and on the internet, and it's not necessarily where a company is targeted. You as XYZ services or XYZ manufacturing, you're not getting targeted specifically by a group in Eastern Europe. You just have an employee or have someone at the company that's unfortunate enough to visit a certain website and click on a certain attachment or a certain pop-up. It used to be very prevalent where you would go to a website and they'd say, oh, you need to update your Adobe Flash in order to view this content. Well, guess what? That's not Adobe Flash getting updated. That's them downloading a malware payload into your system that's really designed to bypass the firewall and antivirus software that most companies and people use. So the big thing to understand is it's very common, and it's not just targeted at big companies. The malware is out there, and it's not discriminating against who it gets access to. If someone clicks that link and opens that attachment that they shouldn't have on a website, then that's it. And also, these guys, like Carl mentioned earlier, you know, they are organizations. I mean, it's well established that these folks operate like companies. They'll go and they'll do information skimming on websites where they literally just collect information that's publicly available. So if your email address is anywhere, which most of us, it is, on LinkedIn, on our company website, depending on the size, they'll collect millions of email addresses, and then they'll just send the virus to all of those email addresses, and whoever doesn't have the security to deal with it, it gets deployed, and that's how it. Small companies get targeted, big companies, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Equifax, I think you remember that happened a couple of years back. Equifax was not targeted. Equifax just happened to be one of the companies that had malware put on. It was a blast. It was a blast email that sent out, or a blast malware, and it just happened to target Equifax. So like Edric said, they're not targeting specific companies. It's just like throwing, I don't know, throwing money out in the window, or throwing an arrow, or shooting an arrow into a crowd. I hate to use that simile or metaphor. They're not targeting a specific person. They're just looking for who they can hit. And your company, unfortunately, may be the one they just target and they figure out what's going on. A lot of times when they get into the systems, they don't know what company they're in. It's only when they start looking around and they start figuring out who's what, where, and how, they figure out what the company is and what kind of information they have.
Great. I haven't seen any additional questions come through.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure. We enjoyed doing this. Thank you on behalf of Travelers. You're on mute, Doug.
I'm muted. Thank you, Carl, Edric, and to everyone who joined today. I think we had well into the 60s, if not more, at least for most of the program. Please be on the lookout for our next invitation. We've got a program coming up on June 23rd, also at 11:30. It'll be presented by Shannon Dennis, a senior safety specialist with Safety Consultants USA. Shannon's going to educate us on the top 10 OSHA citations that are trending now, and how to ensure your company complies as best as it can, and if it is involved in a citation, that how you can manage it in the best possible way. Look for that, and I think that may be in person at our office. We're hoping to get back to an in-person setting so that you can join either way. We're still 100% virtual today, but I think we'll have that clarified in the next invitation. Thanks so much for joining us. I think we're going to sign off.